Ladies and gentlemen, it is finally here, a brand new seasonal affix for 9.1. We're about to get tormented. So here we have it. The Burning Crusade is out and Blizzard is returning to some more 9.1 stuff. Now raid testing seems to be concluded. It is no doubt full steam ahead on the next big patch for retail World of Warcraft. So what is Tormented? Well, we did know there was some suspicion about anima powers being available in the new dungeons, and that is the way they've gone with this, and it's kind of interesting. What we have in each dungeon is 4 new enemies. These are themed around the areas of Torghast. So you'll have somebody representing, say, the Soul-Forged area. He'll be a big burny fellow, etc., etc. Coldheart, and so on and so forth. Now, there are obviously more than 4 areas of Torghast, so no doubt this is probably some sort of weekly rotation. So you'll get these guys. These will be the guys that are in Mythic Plus for that week, and then next week we'll probably get some more, but I'll have to wait to confirm that, as right now we do only have these initial 4. So these are in random orders, which I found really interesting because they do drop a set choice of anima powers. So the way this works is 2 of them will drop the same 3 choices of anima powers for the entire group. So that'd be something like Rude Interruption. So interrupting the enemy will give you a damage bonus, something along those lines. There are lots of these powers, guys, so I'm going to be putting them up on the screen for you to take a look at and read. 2 of them will do that. However, 2 others will give you a choice depending on your role. So DPSs will get the same 3 choices, healers will get their own choices, and tanks will get their own choices. Now, what we can see is these are all positive. These are all some way of increasing your character's damage, its ability to regain mana, if you're a healer, for example, your ability to defend yourself if you're a tank, or put out considerably more damage if you're a tank. Lots of choices like that. So these are actually pretty fun. There are also reflections of Mythic Plus affixes. So Volcanic is present. You'll be putting down volcanic plumes. Currently that is not working in terms of knocking the enemies in the air. The tooltip does say it should do that, but it doesn't do that. It does do ridiculous amounts of damage though. That's pretty crazy. You will have Necrotic in here, which will affect enemies that put absorb shields on themselves. We tested this a little bit, but couldn't see much of what was happening with bosses like Hakar that put absorb shields up. So we'll wait and see on how that works with multiple groups stacking up, taking that one. It's one of those ones that seems a little wasted to take it for one particular boss, but who knows what happens in Mythic Plus world when people start maximizing this kind of stuff. Always gets a little crazy. So you get all these different choices of stuff, and we tried them around. So how does it feel? Feels good. It feels good. Each of them is a bonus. You can do little route changes, so you can plan around depending on the dungeon. We ran many dungeons. So say for the other side, 3 of the 4 are available on the outer ring. So you can, if you want to, you can run around and collect the bonuses before you even start clearing the dungeon, so your group has a significant damage and defensive bonus before you even start dealing with packs, which enables you to do bigger and larger packs if you want to and manage them more effectively, because you get things like silences involved in them to stop enemies casting spells. So you could do that if you want to. If the dungeon is more linear, you'll tend to encounter these things as you go through the dungeon. You can't miss them. So Spires of Ascension, for example, because you have multiple pathways to go through Spires, they've tended to lean the Tormentors to be more towards the latter part of the dungeon. You do tend to get every power, though, before you deal with the last 2 bosses. So I will say that. That is something we saw. We didn't really see any that occurred after the 3rd boss. You have everything by the time you've done 2 of the usually 4 bosses in each of these dungeons. So works out kind of well. Bolster was kind of cool. So when you're defeating enemies, your character gets bolstered, which is nice to reverse the tide on the enemies there. It was a very cool buff, actually. You get 4% damage for each enemy you kill, and that stacks up to 5, so you can get a 20% bonus damage effect on your character. It does only last 20 seconds, and it does not refresh as you kill more enemies. So the idea is to either continuously keep this buff generally good, because even 1 stack at a 4% damage bonus is very, very good. So it's a very strong ability by itself. But obviously coordinated groups can do things like pull 5 enemies towards the boss, give themselves 20% damage to line up with things like Bloodlust and all that kind of stuff. So you can do some pretty creative, imaginative things with these abilities, and I'm sure as more and more people play around with them, you'll start to see some interesting variants. If you're not interested in any of those, though, they even have a raw stats option, which will just give you a flat 8% crit, 8% haste, depending on your highest stats, and you can even get 2 of these, so you can get 16% extra bonus in there, kind of like Corruptions, which is what a lot of people were comparing them to as we were playing through the dungeon. So I would say these are good. There are a couple of things, though. It feels like they could go crazy with it. In fact, when I see things like this, I'm like, just go further, Blizz. Because that would be really, really fun if they went crazy wild with it. But I understand why they don't want to do that. They don't want it to be complete RNG. They don't want players complaining that they failed their 26 key or whatever because they got bad bonuses. So the bonuses are set in stone, and you do know which of the Tormentors will give you which ones. So you know that this guy is the guy who's going to give you Volcanic. You know this is the guy who's going to give you Bolster, etc., etc., etc. So your other question is probably, can you skip them? You absolutely can. Now, I will say that in a lot of cases, you'd have to go out of your way to skip them. You would have to kind of go invisible. They do have True Sight or try and death skip them, something like that. Some of them you can just walk past. You could totally do that. The one in Necrotic Wake is off to the side, so you could just ignore that if you wanted to. However, that does give a significant damage buff, so you probably don't want to do that. If you do skip them, it gives the final boss an aura that represents whichever one you skipped. So if you do skip them, you will have to deal with a more difficult end boss, similar to what we saw in Battle for Azeroth with the 4 enemies that you had to deal with there. Same sort of deal. So it'll be up to you to do that. Are there any worth skipping? Sure, you can skip maybe the Rude Interruption one or the one that gives your party movement speed if you really wanted to, because they do not give percentage. So they are a time commitment. They are a time investment to deal with. They're not particularly difficult. They will get more difficult, obviously, as keys scale up. We were running 10 keys just to mess around with them and see what we could do with them and science them. But obviously, with all things in Mythic Plus, the higher up you go, the more difficult it's going to be. So that's something you want to bear in mind. The Soulforge one puts a very nasty burning aura on people. The Frost one, the Cold Heart one, puts a really, really, really nasty dot on an individual player that's quite heavy to deal with and heal through, but because you can't dispel it, unfortunately. It's very, very nasty. But for the most part, they're not too bad. What I could say about this is that if you're somebody who does your 1M plus a week or something like that just to get your Great Vault, you're going to have a great time with this because you're going to be clicking it. You're going to be like, ooh, what do I get this week? Going to mess around with it. Going to have a nice damage buff. Going to have some little bonuses to my character. Not quite as crazy as you'd seen a long Torghast run, but you're going to get some bonuses which help you do keys much quicker. I would definitely say, on average, this is going to allow people to do keys a few levels higher than what they would do during Season 1. I say that because Prideful is great, but Prideful is a very short-term buff, usually planned around just using on bosses. These buffs last the entire dungeon. A lot of them do significant damage, maybe even to the point where they're going to get nerfed. I kind of hope they don't. I don't see the problem, especially with the new key scoring system coming into the Mythic Plus world. I think it's fine if you make it a little easier for people to get past that 15 barrier. And so they can actually do maybe 16s or 17s on Fortified rather than trying to push 15 Tyrannicals, which people don't particularly enjoy. This will definitely make your runs overall easier because you are permanently buffed. Even if you die, you do not lose your buffs. You just have them throughout the entire run. Really quite fun. What I'd like to have seen, though, is if you are doing really high keys, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of manipulation and a lot of planning and strategy around some of these in order to really do some sort of shenanigans. The issue, I think, will come with people who like to do, say, somewhere between 4 to 6 keys a week, you know, looking to get an extra choice in their vault or whatever it might be, is that they're a little forgettable after you've done a few runs. That's what I would say. They're a little forgettable. Once you've had the power of Volcanic and you're doing all that bonus damage, the 3rd and 4th time you're getting it, you're like, okay, I choose Volcanic here. That's kind of where you're like, I wish there was more variety. I would say this. I wish I was more excited upon clicking the orb to see what I would get. That doesn't happen because you know exactly what you're probably going to choose. You know that the guy is going to drop it. It's just a case of grabbing the buff, which feels a little anti the Torghastian style of what they're going for here. But it makes sense. Like I said, they know people are just going to complain if they got a series of bad buffs in their run and the other group got better buffs and they got higher keys and my friends did this. I always seem to get the crappy ones. Blah, 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 blah. That's the kind of thing that Blizzard obviously wants to avoid, but it does take a little bit of the fun out of it, knowing it's very predictable what you're going to get and dealing with it. Not that it's been a problem in the past, right? I would say it's a very minor criticism. We didn't have this problem in the past once we knew what emissaries and things we were going to dealing with. That was fine. So you are ultimately getting more powerful, you are getting stronger, and it does add a funner Kiss benefit, when we talk about this Kiss curse effect of Mythic Plus, it does add that to it. Some other questions we always get asked is, can you swap your buff? No, you can't. Although the orbs do stay around, you cannot choose another buff. That's it. Once you've decided on your buff, that is your buff in order to go with. What it does do, though, is it makes the runs towards the latter half after you've got your buffs so much quicker. The healing one that I played with was called Loose Mana, where I was dropping mana orbs everywhere that gave me 10% of my mana back, and I dropped so many of them that mana was no longer an issue. And the tanks start doing significantly more damage. They get a Thorns effect, which is really strong, which allows them to take part in more damage. Healers got the ability to do significantly more damage passively just by being around enemies. I'm pulsing on this healing one here. I'm pulsing a Shadow Aura to enemies within 12 yards of me. All I needed to do was be aware. I also gained a Gavel on my healer, so I could stun enemies by hitting them on the head, which was kind of fun. Not super useful, but it was kind of fun to have this extra element of gameplay thrown in. That was what I enjoyed about it. And we also laughed about the idea of toxic interrupts, because your interrupts do give you this, I think it's 5 or 10% damage buff for 5 seconds. Everybody trying to grab the interrupts as quickly as possible. Definitely brought us back to the days of Legion, actually, because it reminded me of the old Cephas, where people were trying to scam Cephas interrupts as quickly as possible, just so they could have the bonus. Similarly, there is a very powerful shield in there, which is very reminiscent of Pride's. Based on your max health, you get a big shield every 30 seconds. It was easily the go-to, which I guess would lead us onto our final criticism of this is, when it comes to these kind of powers, there are always going to be ones that are better than others. And certainly in a general sense, that's the case here as well. You do get the choice of 3. We tried sciencing different ones, but ultimately it was like, well, Volcanic just does so much damage that it'd be stupid not to take Volcanic. The Pride's shield is so strong that you should probably just take the Pride's shield. There's an execute one, but it stacks too slowly. You just don't get the benefit. Sure, in very, very high tyrannical keys, you might actually see the benefit of having this big damage bonus below 20%. But ultimately, if you're doing, up to 15s or whatever, they just don't last long enough. Whereas you're getting another buff which is consistently working from 100% to 0. Things like that Blizzard needs to be aware of is that, frankly, some of them just completely dominate the others. That doesn't mean that the dominant ones should be nerfed. I don't want Volcanic to become some boring, barely does anything effect just to make the weaker ones seem stronger. I would like the weaker ones to become stronger. And that would make it a lot more interesting and provide a lot more thought-provoking choice. Because the choices are there, right? I was talking about Necrotic earlier. The choice is there. Like, this does have an effect on this dungeon. However, it's for 1 or 2 enemies in the dungeon, whereas if I choose the other more general one, it's just for everything. So it makes the whole run significantly better. So Blizzard could probably take a look at that and see whether there's something else they could do. Maybe make it like Condemn, so it works from 100 to 80 and it works from 20 to 0. So you could get the stacks rolling a little bit earlier. Something along those lines would make that maybe potentially more effective, especially for classes that do a lot of opening burst damage rather than consistent damage. That would be in a way they could go. Overall, really happy with this though, guys. I think it's pretty cool. I think it's going to add a little bit of fun. It makes your character stronger in M+. It's going to give you a few more levels, more than likely, in terms of key levels that you can do. I quite like it. I wish it would go a bit further, and certainly we had a lot of discussion today on stream. With this kind of idea of anima powers in Mythic Plus, I would absolutely love to see Blizzard take the idea that they did with PvP with the brawls and throw that into the dungeon experience, is to have crazy anima Torghast weekends or something where you can get class-specific anima powers, because they're not present in this system, where your characters can get really wacky. They don't have to drop loot. They don't need to provide Mythic Plus score if you do them on that system, but they could provide Valor points, right? It could be a nice Valor point farming weekend, just like they do with Double Honor farming. There's no issue with that, I don't think, where you can just have these crazy fun dungeon runs where you can play with your friends, have a lot of fun, get some crazy powers, kill some bosses that maybe you couldn't kill ordinarily, and gain some Valor points for it. That might be a good idea for Blizzard to look into, honestly. But we'll see how it goes. I'll keep an eye out next week when these rotate through. It is the PTR, so sometimes they do weekly rotations every day. So I'll have a look tomorrow and see what happens. But other than that, we'll check in next week when we have a fuller picture of all the powers. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you're looking forward to 9.1. It is going to be coming soon, and we should have some big news about a little thing that's happening just before 9.1 launches. So stay tuned for that. I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.